This, the fifth in our series of Ask the Breeder, in conjunction with Limagrain, in conjunction with Farmers Weekly. This session is all about maize, and the topic really is how to get the best possible return from your maize investment. I've introduced myself. Basically, I'm Tim Richmond. I'm from a dairying background originally. For the last 20 years, I've been the Maize Product Manager for Limagrain. With us today also is Richard Camplin. Morning, Richard.
Morning, Tim. Morning, everyone.
Richard's our UK technical manager. He looks after our forage trials, maize trials, and other forage species in the UK. In today's session, we're going to give you an introduction to the Limagrain breeding program, and Richard's going to tell you all about how the program delivers the sort of top quality, cutting edge varieties that we have in the marketplace, how we achieve that, how we get those to marketplace, and that'll take about 10 minutes to do that. And then we'll move into your question and answer session. A few housekeeping points before we get started. For those of you who want basis points, some of you have registered already, but if you haven't done so, you can do at the bottom of the screen. Just put your name and number in there, and we'll sort the points out afterwards. In terms of questions, obviously it's a question and answer session. It's Ask the Breeder, so please ask questions in the chat function at the bottom, and we'll get round to those. If we don't get the opportunity to answer all your questions, then we will get back to you sort of individually after the event and provide some answers for you. At the bottom, there's also some additional resources. There's some PDFs and some links to websites, videos, that kind of thing. We give you a bit more information about the maize portfolio from Limagrain. Throughout the session, we'll also be doing a poll. There'll be one or two or possibly three polls as we go through the session. I'll ask the question. The question will pop up on the screen, and there'll be 4 possible answers. Please do participate. Just check one of the answers that you think is relevant if you want to take part. It's just a bit of fun, really, just to sort of gauge attitudes really around maize, or to get some idea of what the audience is thinking and things. And if we could do that initially, the first poll, that'd be great, just before we go over to the full introduction. I'm not sure. We had a few technical issues this morning. Whether the poll's going to pop up or not, I'm not sure. But if not, it doesn't matter. We'll move on. Okay. So moving into the first slide, please. Okay. So the question is, how do we get? Will your maize give you the best possible return on your investment? Maize is a great crop, but it does cost sort of £800 to £900 per hectare to grow it. There's quite a lot of investment in it. So obviously what you need to do is get a really good return on that investment and to sort of make it work as hard as possible. And in the context of today's world, whether you're growing maize for AD or for livestock is equally important. In the AD situation, there's a limitation on the amount of sort of crop that you can grow and put into the plant. Therefore, each hectare is going to sort of be as productive as possible. And feedstock is, waste feedstock is limited as well. So we really need something that's going to power things on as much as possible. On the livestock side, it's been great recently for the arable farmers, I guess, because the grain prices have gone up, but also world prices have gone up for maize and for soya as well. And if we look at the sort of what's happened over the last year, some charts here from the HDB, we can see that soya has gone up £160 a tonne since January last year, and feed wheat has gone up £70 a tonne since January last year, and possibly it's going to go up some more. If you put that through into concentrate prices, HDB do a 5-year rolling average, and they're saying concentrate prices will go up at least £25 a tonne from what they were last year as well. So basically, if you, as a dairy farmer or livestock farmer producing meat, you want to get as much from your forage as possible and sort of reduce the amount that you purchase in as much as possible, because that's really essentially where the profit comes from. So we need to really make it work as hard as we can. Maize is a known sort of variable in all this, so obviously just make that work. Have the next slide, please. So how can the Limagrain, the LG maize breeding program help, and what is it that we do? Well, first thing to say, I suppose, is we have a proven pedigree breeding maize varieties for the UK. And you can see in the slide there some well-known names on the left-hand side. We've got the likes of Hudson, Lincoln, Melody. They're all 20th century varieties, if you like. They're all been sold when I started in the maize 20 years ago. And we've had a whole succession of varieties since. That pedigree is carried through. We've got well-known varieties today from Limagrain like Ambition and Pinnacle. And we've got some new cutting-edge ones coming through as well, like Prospect and Resolute. So what's the secret to the success behind bringing those there? Well, essentially, it's because we are a UK-specific breeding program. We test all our varieties in UK conditions, but we're also part of a bigger European resource. So our breeding is actually done in Rulland in Holland. That's where the breeders are based. They create the crosses there, but then they ship all that material across to Richard and his team, and they test the material in locations in the UK. And the best varieties then are taken forward for independent testing in the BSPB NIAB trials series. Next slide, please. So which leads me very nicely to sort of introduce Richard and his part of the presentation. Richard, he is responsible for the UK maize trialling program, and as I say, he's our main link between the European breeders and what happens in the UK. And he's been working in field trials and forage and maize trials for 25 years. He's got a wealth of experience, and a lot of the questions that we get today we can put to Richard, and he can share his experience and expertise with us. So with that, Richard, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. Good morning, everyone. Just a few slides from me, really, to just outline a little bit more about the breeding program, some of the advances we've made in the last 15 to 20 years, and then to look at some of today's varieties. So if we go to the next slide, please. So as Tim has said, most of our work, of the actual crossing work and seed production work is done on the continent, but when it comes to actually testing and selecting varieties, that work has to be done here in the UK, because our main goal is to find varieties that are specifically useful for our own UK conditions and our own UK silage market. Varieties that are developed in other parts of Europe, won't really necessarily perform in the specific conditions of the UK. It's a very specific maritime type climate, and it offers and it has specific sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. Anyway, so moving on. So we invest highly in technology, so both in the breeding itself, but also in the trialing. So we use on our harvester onboard NIR testing. So that allows us to test all of our plots for quality. So a whole range of quality aspects can be tested, and we can use that information in our selection program. I would say that we invest a lot in trials. I would say we have the largest silage maize trials network in the UK. We're testing regularly on 7 to 9 different locations across the UK each year, and that gives us an extensive amount of data on our hybrids. But not only are we testing in 1 year, we're testing over a number of seasons. So when it comes to making advice about our hybrids at the time of commercialization, we have an extensive amount of information on them, how they perform across a lot of sites, and also a lot of seasons. Next slide, please. So what's our aims? Well, our goal really is to provide, to provide those of you that invest in our varieties the best return on that investment. So how do we do that? Well, obviously having a large trialing program, helps us to find those well-adapted and high-performing hybrids that work well in the UK. Stability is obviously a big part of what we're looking for now. With our ever-changing climate, we need to be looking for varieties that are stable, not only in 1 year and can produce in 1 year, but can produce across a whole range of different years and give good performance. Again, we're looking at all the breeding aims, the major agronomical breeding aims. Obviously, yield is a big factor, but yield plus earliness is very important. Earliness, again, in our ever more unpredictable climate, helps to give growers an insurance policy against poor autumns, ensuring that the crop can be harvested mature, and also in an environmentally responsible manner. Maintaining soil conditions, trying to avoid having to harvest in really poor conditions at the end of the year. I'll talk a bit about quality throughout this little short presentation, but quality is a big part of it, and the NIR that we do on all of our trial plots helps us to assess the quality of all those varieties as they go through the trialing system. Maize has always been traditionally grown for starch, and that's the main energy source. but more and more we're looking to improve the energy that's available from the rest of the plant. So cell wall digestibility, a big part of the Limagrain breeding initiative through the last 20 or 30 years, is also important in adding to the overall energy value of the forage. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be a feed either for cows or a feed for an AD plant, and energy is going to help drive the production in both those situations. I'll have the next slide, please. So this next couple of slides are looking at the historical year-on-year improvements that we've made within our breeding program. So you can see here we've got some varieties on the left there, the varieties that were top of the pile in 2004 on the descriptive list, and in the red on the right we've got some of the top performing varieties on the current 2021 descriptive list. In the centre there is the average improvement over those 15 or 20 years. So you can see during that 15-20 year period, we pushed on yields on average by about 3 tonnes per hectare, which equivalates to about 20% more yield in the current hybrids than we were getting way back in 2004. But importantly, we've also pushed on the maturity. So rather than just getting yield, we're also getting earlier maturing hybrids, which again is very important. And an extra 2% doesn't seem very much, but in October that could actually equilibrate to an extra week earlier than what the hybrids were way back in 2004. And that's just an average overall. If you take a variety like Gemma there on the right, that would be more than 2% earlier than most of the varieties on the left. So some big gains have been made over that time in both yield and earliness. If we can have the next slide, please. So what about quality? Well, I've talked a bit about quality, and quality is very important to what we're doing. And you can see we've made improvements then over the last 15 to 20 years as well. In terms of starch, we've moved it on probably about 1%. It's getting more difficult now to significantly increase starch, but still in the last 10 to 15 years, we've moved it on another 1%. But another major factor which contributes to energy is the cell wall digestibility. And certainly the scope to extend that is far greater within the germ pool than it is to extend starch. So over the last 15 years or so, we've increased the cell wall on average by about 4%, which adds into the energy that the crop can provide. And as you can see, the ME levels have increased by about 1.6 megajoules per kilogram. Well, 0.6 doesn't seem like a lot in the bigger scheme of things, but if you think about it, if you're feeding 10 kilos of maize per cow, that's an extra 6 megajoules, which is roughly 1 litre of milk. If you're feeding 300 or 400 cows over a full lactation, then there's quite a lot of savings to be made there in energy from your forage rather than energy that you have to buy in. And as Tim was just saying about the increased prices there. So we have made some quite clear gains over the last 15 or 20 years. I think that's there to see. So if we move on to the next slide, please. This is sort of summarized basically in this side. You can see that with the increase in the starch and the increase in the cell wall, the two parts that are driving energy, we've increased the ME concentration per kilogram by 0.6 megajoules. But if you then factor in the extra yield we've also managed to produce over that period, extra 3 tonnes per hectare, then you can see the actual energy yield per hectare has increased on average about 45,000 megajoules. Now that's a lot of energy from every hectare more today than we were getting way back in 2004 on average. And that has a massive benefit both for milk production and also for gas production, because energy will help to drive both those processes. Next slide, please. So if we move on from the historical changes over the last 15 to 20 years, look at some varieties that are modern varieties that are available in the marketplace now. And the question there is, do all the varieties give the same return on investment? Well, what we're going to do here is going to look at a new variety of ours, top performing variety, LG Prospect, against another fully listed variety that's currently listed on the NIAB descriptive list that you can find there. So, which we'll call variety A. And you can see straight away that Prospect has a yield advantage of about 1.2 tonnes over the fully listed variety. So every hectare that you grow, you're getting more tonnage. This has a knock-on effect on the cost of production. So you can see in the second column there, you're roughly saving about £4 per tonne on the production of that variety. And just remember, at the end of the day, contractor costs are the same, whether it's drilling costs, harvesting costs, spraying costs, fertilizer costs. they're all roughly the same. The seed cost of variety A might be slightly lower, but overall, you're getting far more out of it, and the potential cost saving is there. And on an average crop, that would probably be around £40 to £50 per hectare. If we move on to the next columns, you look at the quality. We talked a bit about quality already. It's a big driver of our breeding program, and you can see with a variety like Prospect, you've got a higher starch and you've got a much improved cell wall digestibility. So those two factors together are feeding into a higher ME content for that particular variety over variety A. So if you put the two things together, improved yield, improved ME content, and you can see there's a really big increase in the amount of energy per hectare that you're getting out of the Prospect maize. So 22,000 megajoules, which itself has quite a big knock-on effect for the amount of litres of milk that we can produce, and obviously then the value of that milk. So the top yielding variety, does it give, this gives a really good return on investment. We think, you've got savings in terms of production costs, and you've also got an increased milk income. So you're getting a lot more from your forage, and I think that provides a pretty good return on that investment. So if we go to the final slide, please. So that was just a quick run through of where we are over the last couple of years and where we are with our material now. I think the sort of to finalise, really, I want to say that we are fully committed to the UK silage market. We invest very heavily in breeding and R&D here specifically here in the UK to give the end users the best varieties we can. And we do believe that if you do invest in our seed, then obviously it will give you a really good return on that investment. So that's a little introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard, for that intro. Hopefully that will prompt some questions from you all. Please do type them in. That's the whole point of what we're doing now. We did ask about the poll at the beginning of the presentation. If we could just pop up the result there, we asked about how many megajoules difference between top and bottom varieties that are available on the NIOB list today. The result, Richard, came through at 15 to 25,000 megajoules.
Oh, so, right. Okay. Yeah, well, I would say that would probably be what I would expect. I might have thought that maybe we would have gone a little bit lower, because I think sometimes we underestimate what the value of the crop is in energy. And I hope the little presentation I've given to you there shows that there are quite big differences. And in fact, if we take the highest to the lowest on the list map now, we'd be at something over 30,000 megajoules per hectare difference between the very best. So yeah, it is considerable.
Great. Okay, thank you. Right, so let's get into the questions. That's the whole meeting today. So we've got a question here from M. White. Follows on really quite nicely what you're saying, Richard. He says, I'm looking for varieties which are high yielding, but a maximum FAO of 180. High starch yield for high yielding dairy cows and resistant to disease. So you could provide a bit of advice. Maybe you've partly answered that one already, actually.
Well, I think I probably have answered that one sort of partly already. The variety I've just been talking about in the presentation there, the Prospect maize, would fit that scenario very well. It's an FAO 180. It's an early maturing variety. As you can see, it's got a very high starch content, and it does have the benefit of a very high cell wall digestibility as well. So you've got the combined, increased global energy for every kilo that you're feeding. So I think it would work really well as a high energy dense feed, for high producing dairy cows. On top of that, its disease resistance spectrum is really good. It's a healthy plant all the way through to harvest. It doesn't suffer from diseases like fusarium, and it doesn't get any leaf diseases like eye spot either. So it's a very high quality variety with really good disease resistance. So that would fit really nicely in that type of scenario.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Yeah, one or two people putting questions in just relating to the sort of favourite varieties already. So I suppose that does lead on to one question that's in there. Basically, if you've been growing the same variety for several years now, you talk about starch levels being maximised already, or get very hard to increase and stuff. So why should people move on to a new variety?
Well, I think there's a whole host of reasons there. We're not just growing, we are growing the crop for energy, but all that energy isn't just coming from starch. And although the ability to increase starch is starting to slow down, we will still see starches going up over the coming years. New varieties bring a lot more to the table than just increasing the starch. You've seen how the yields have increased over that time. You've seen how the global energy, with the improvement in cell wall digestibility, has allowed the varieties to give more energy per kilo, more energy per hectare. And of course, breeders are also working on improving disease resistance and lodging, and of course earliness as well. If you think you go back 20 years to varieties, then you'd have to grow a very late variety to get a high yield, whereas now you can look at the earlier material and still not have a compromise in yield, but still have the earliness that we need for so many maize growing areas here in the UK. So yeah, always be looking to move on to something new. I think there's always something new out there which will give a benefit on most farms.
Okay. We'll pick up a little bit more on that one in a bit. Another one here, John G. He's a farmer in Yorkshire Wolds. How can I be sure of achieving 30% dry matter in my maize silage?
Well, that's a good one. Yeah, obviously on the very margins of maize growing up there, some quite high ground, some altitude. I think John, really, you've got to think about that the early decisions are going to be quite important to you. Your field selection, choosing your best fields, south facing, good land, getting your field preparation right, and obviously choosing an early variety. There are several good early varieties that would work well in that part of the world. You can also have a look at your seed rates. By reducing your seed rates somewhat, you can again help to bring those varieties earlier. If you're bringing it down to about 100,000, say, you won't compromise hopefully your yield too much, but you'll still have the opportunity of getting the crop out a little bit earlier, and with good starch and good quality. And you can see there are a good range of our early material which would fit that bill quite well. So I would say field selection, seed rate, and have a look at a good early variety. That should be the best options for you to get the best out of that crop. Yeah.
Okay, Richard, thank you. I'm just trying to cover as many topic areas as possible here because I'm conscious of the time. So we're jumping around between topics a little bit. But there's one here about grain maize, Richard. So and there's one from Francis M. Sorry. What varieties of maize are best suited for growing for grain maize, and what would you say are the main differences in management requirements from those of forage maize?
Right, okay. Well, first, I suppose in our part of the world that there hasn't been a great breeding effort towards producing grain maize because it's a very small market in most of the northwestern parts of Europe. But we have had some good grain maize varieties. The variety Yukon has been successfully grown for grain maize or for crimped maize, as has the variety LG30179. So we have got two quite well adapted varieties. In terms of the management of the two crops, I think pretty much the same in terms of inputs. Obviously, one of the major differences would be that with grain maize, you'd be looking at a lower seed rate. So sort of that 75 to 85,000 seeds to help drive that maturity, to help to fill that cob, rather than going at a silage rate. In terms of what you want in your variety, again, the grain maize has got to stand in the field for an extra 4 to 6 weeks, probably beyond the time that a silage maize would stand there. So having good standing ability and resistance to lodging, resistance to brackling will be very important, because you don't want those crops going over before the harvester can get in there. Good cob maturity is obviously important, which varieties like Yukon have. And the other thing is diseases. I mean, diseases are one of the biggest issues towards grain maize. We've seen it sometimes in silage maize. The crop starts to die rapidly just before harvest. If you have the same issue in grain maize, that disease, particularly Fusarium disease, will soften those stems, make them more susceptible to brackling and to lodging. But also the Fusarium has got the added problem in the grain is that you could have increased levels of Fusarium and therefore, increased levels of mycotoxins, which will have a knock-on effect to cattle or to any as a feed and cause some problems in the feeding side. So good disease resistance, good standing, and manipulate those seed rates down just to give you an earlier harvest, because as I say, 4 to 6 weeks later in the field.
Richard, just a supplementary question to that one from James. He's just asking, are we doing game trials? Sorry, not game. So we're doing a grain maize trials.
Yes, we've been looking at that. We've had quite a lot of questions as a company about grain maize and how our varieties would perform under grain maize conditions, whether for straight grain or for crimped grain. And this coming year, we are going to set up a series to look at the performance of our UK adjusted selected hybrids for grain. So yes.
Okay. Then there's moving topics on a little bit. There's one from Olivia here asking about cover cropping, or really, I suppose, in terms of maize, about undersowing. Really, is there anything you tell us? I suppose it's really the choice between undersowing or follow-on crop, sowing after maize.
Yeah. Well, there's been quite a bit of interest in undersowing over the last couple of years. Obviously, the MGA and others have been doing some work on this. We've done a little bit of work ourselves. Well, first and foremost, I would say if you can get away with an early variety and get that off at a good time, so you can put in a follow-on crop, that would always be the best way to go. So, because when you're growing two crops together, a grass and a maize crop, you've always run the risk that there's going to be some competition between the two. So you have to be very careful. So if you can avoid that by growing an early variety, getting that maize off, and then putting a crop afterwards, whether it be grass or winter cereals or whatever, then that would obviously be the best option. But yes, undersowing. There are people looking now at sowing at the same time as the maize. So having adopted drills where you can drill grass into row between the maize at the same time as the maize. And also there's the traditional way of doing it, which was to go in at 6 or 7 leaves and to oversow with grass in the maize rows at that time. There's advantages and disadvantages of both. Obviously, if you go at the same time as the maize, you've got to be very careful because the two crops are going to be there for a long time together, and you run the risk that the grass can compete with the maize. So slow growing grasses there, fescues, amenity fescues, are probably what you're going to be looking at to try and minimize the impact on the maize. And whereas in an oversowing situation, again, fescues are good, but you could maybe go with some more fesculolium, something that will give you a little bit more growth in a closing canopy. But again, keeping the sowing rates sensible as well, not too heavy amount of grass as well. Because at the end of the day, we're growing the crop for the maize, and we're just looking at what the benefits after the maize in terms of ground coverage, carrying machinery, and possibly even a graze crop. But so you've got to be careful with it. But yes, it will work in some situations, I'm sure.
Okay, great. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, so I suppose just looking at the other questions coming through, maybe it's time just to do another poll quickly, just to break things up a little bit. So if we could pop that one up. The question is, how often would you normally change part of your maize area to a new variety? Just bearing in mind, we're talking about all this new genetics and stuff. It's just be interesting to see what the attitude is from people on that one, really. Whilst that one's up, I'll just ask to change the topic again, Richard. One here is, with so many seed treatments available since the lot of Measurol, what should I be looking for in a seed treatment?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, I mean, obviously for quite a number of years we've all relied on Thyram Measurol, and that's been the go-to treatment. Obviously, in the last year, there's been quite a lot of concern about bird damage and people moving to Corit as the only option there for deterring birds, if you like. Obviously, we don't know how long Corit's going to be around for. That could be around for another couple of years, and then we're going to have to look at other options. But in terms of seed treatments, you want to get something that's going to give the best start to your varieties. Obviously, the Corit will provide some bird repellency, but if you're looking at fungicidal effects, we have a seed treatment this year called Corit Pro, which brings both the benefits of Corit, but also brings in fungicide Redigo, which helps to protect against the Pythiums and the Fusariums, and also Sedaxane, which helps against Rhizoctonia. But also with some added nutrients of zinc and manganese, there are some other benefits in there to help get the crop off to a good start, to encourage root growth and development and stem elongation. And I think everywhere we go, we should always be looking to try and get the crop off to a good start. So if you've got a treatment that can add both bird repellency, but can also give you some extra benefits in terms of establishment. And of course, most of our varieties have got very high early vigor as well. So the combination of the seed treatment and the early vigor will help that quick establishment and get the crop off to a really good start.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, so jumping topics again. So Richard S. He said basically, I've been advised by a rep that there's a new maize variety available that allows starch to be available immediately and can be fed straight away from the clamp. Is this true? And how do I know which varieties to use?
Well, I'm not sure. That's a bit of a vague sort of question, but I think there's been quite a bit of discussion about starch availability in the rumen in some of the press recently. I think really when you're looking at the hybrids that are available at the moment, I think managing your crop is the best way to manage the starch availability. So manage that crop, harvest it at the right time. Under 35% is always the best way to go. Don't leave it in the field till it gets overly dry. 38, 40 plus percent. Get it in at under 35%. Make sure that your contractor is doing the right job, that the corn cracker's properly set up, the grain's properly processed on the harvester, and then make sure you do a good job with ensiling. Obviously, the longer you can leave it in the clamp, the more the grain is conditioned, ready for feeding out. But I think harvest date and processing is as much a factor in making that starch available as anything else. There's been a lot of talk about dent maize. I think this is probably what this question is relating to, and that dent maize has more digestible starch. Well, in the UK, we don't grow dent maize. We only grow flint dent maize, because if you know, maize is a hybrid. It has two parents, a flint parent and a dent parent, and they come together to make your hybrid. We don't grow dent with two dents in the UK. We don't grow that. So all the maize is the same. It all has flint and dent in its parentage. We couldn't really grow dent types in the UK because they're too late, too poor cold tolerance, and too poor early vigor. So we wouldn't want to grow that type of thing. So I think we're looking at flint dent maize, where there will be some variation across those types in terms of of bypass and rumen degradable starch. But I still think at the end of the day, how you look after that crop, how you harvest it, and how you process it, and how you ensile it will have the biggest bearing on how that feeds at the end of the day. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not there.
Okay, Richard. Well, it's a tricky one, as you say, isn't it?
It's a tricky one, I'm sure,
Sort of a question, not quite the same, but sort of related to it. There's one here. I grow maize for a starch, but you say breeders can't increase the starch levels anymore. So I guess, what's the point of changing variety? I guess, we talked a little bit there, haven't we, about starch, different degradabilities of starch, but then there's sort of limitation maybe on the amount of starch that's available anyway.
Well, there is, and I think some of the slides I showed you earlier illustrate the point quite well. I mean, I know starch will continue to go up. It may just not, the variability within the germplasm to allow it to go up very quickly is probably not there now, but it will creep up with future varieties. But I mean, new varieties offer so much more than just increasing in starch. You've got the global energy will increase because we're increasing the cell wall, and also all the other agronomic attributes around the varieties would be well worth the benefit of moving into new stuff. So it's the energy will be there going forward, and it will increase, but there are lots of other attributes to go for as well.
Okay, thank you. Again, slight change of tack here. There's one from Linda A. Can I grow maize to supplement stock feed for pigs? There has been some interest in using maize for pigs, isn't there? So is there anything you can tell us about what sort of maize maybe, or how you manage it, or is it any different?
Well, again, I think you'd probably be looking there at grain stroke crimped maize, I think, for finishing pigs. So again, it comes back to the grain question that you asked me about earlier. Again, a similar, looking for a grain type variety that's going to give you an early maturing cob with that good standing ability, as we said before, which can be harvested in an area where the pigs are. So obviously, you have to find a variety that's suitable to your area. So as I say, Yukon is suitable to most areas where you might want to grow grain. And again, that would be, you'd be looking probably at crimped grain there rather than dry grain, which is an excellent feed for all stock really. So yeah, it would, if you can grow it in your area, then I would say that it's worth investigating and having a look at as a feed for your for the pigs, definitely.
Okay, so we did a poll a few minutes ago. I think if we just pop up the results from that. Richard, I think you'd be quite interested to see. It
Oh, yeah.
was asking about how often you change the variety, or how often you grew a new one, basically. So the results basically are 41%. The majority said it's every 2 to 3 years. 30% every year, 23% every 4 to 5 years. Nobody said just when the variety stops being available, basically. So that's probably quite encouraging. So it looks like there is some appetite to try new material out there, and so to see what works. I think I've said before, Richard, didn't we? It's good to sort of test things on your farm and to keep an eye on what's coming through, because as breeders we advance things on every year, and there's always new varieties to look at. But maybe it's a good idea to just try what works for you in your own little sort of microclimate and stuff.
For sure. So 2 to 3 years was the maximum, was it? There was the most popular answer, was it, Tim? Did you say?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, 30%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say that's good. As you can see, that how things have moved after 10, 15, 20 years, they're moving on quite a long way. So we are making rapid advances. But if you are going to try a new variety, obviously, you're already growing something that you're familiar with, you feel fairly comfortable with. No one would expect you to go the whole hog and change your whole acreage in one go. Think about which variety you want to take out, and then try a small acreage of a new variety alongside that, and see how it performs, in your conditions. The official trials booklet here, as we showed before, it's got lots of data from lots of different trial sites around the country, but it's never going to tell you exactly how things will work on your farm. So yeah, try a small acreage, and yeah, it's good to see that people are looking at that and are looking to change more regularly than I would have thought. It might have been a bit longer than that, so I'm encouraged by that. It's good.
So I think the key very much is do your own research, isn't it, and use the independent data that's available,
For sure.
and make the decisions based on what you're looking for, whether that be more energy or suitability, earliness, and whatever. So yeah, another good question actually coming here from Simon M. It's not so much a technical question, Richard, but more of a commercial one, but you might be able to help. It says, how is Brexit going to influence the good old B word? How is Brexit going to influence seed production and varieties available to the UK market? And that is quite an interesting one, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is, and it's something we've spent an inordinate amount of time on over the last 12 months. Obviously, the biggest change is that in the past, all the varieties that we grow or that are registered in Europe are registered centrally. They may be tested in individual states, but they're registered centrally on the European Common Catalogue. Now, obviously, now we've left Europe, we're no longer party to the European Common Catalogue, so we only have varieties on our own UK national list. And legally, we can only sell varieties from our UK national list. In the past, we could go to the European Common Catalogue and we could take varieties off there and we could sell them happily, legally in this country. How that's going to impact on varieties? Well, for us, for breeders, obviously, we have to make sure everything is completely tested in the UK, and it goes through the testing system and goes onto the UK national list. But it will also mean that in some of the niche areas where we're looking at maybe later varieties, varieties for AD, where we might have gone to Europe because it fit, you can take a later maturing variety that they use in Europe and you could use it in certain scenarios in the UK. We won't be able to do that anymore. We can't just go and take a variety from Europe and bring it into the UK and sell it here to say an AD farmer in Norfolk, which has got a requirement for maybe a much later maturing variety than we would normally use in the mainstream. So that's going to limit the availability of certain niche type varieties in the future. So we will see some differences. If there's a shortage of maize seed one particular year, we won't be able to just go off and get maize seed from somewhere else. And that will be the same for any crops as well. If there's a shortage of seed from any particular species, we won't just be able to go and grab varieties from Europe anymore and bring them into the UK unless they're listed on the UK national list, because legally we can't sell them anymore. So more thought has to go into it, more testing, and it should be good, hopefully, because more varieties will have to go through the UK national list system. We'll have less varieties coming in on the periphery that we don't know much about. I mean, we've talked a lot about our trials and testing program, how we put a lot of effort into testing here in the UK across a lot of sites and seasons. It'll stop some of the varieties appearing in the marketplace and being sold to growers with very little information. and very little trials and testing. So for us, I think it'll work quite well, but I think it will have some limitations at certain fringe areas of the market.
Okay, thanks, Richard. So basically, the availability of purpose-bred UK varieties will remain good, but there may be less choice of bargain basement stuff or whatever, or stuff that's perhaps only suited to the best parts of the UK where maize is easier to grow. So yeah. Okay. We're just going to do another quick poll. We've only got a few minutes left. We'll do them very quickly. So the question is, what are the most important criteria when making your purchasing decision? And hopefully those answers are popping up on the screen as we talk. Just a quick one here, Richard. A couple more questions, I think. Simon H has asked, has the level of fusarium increased in recent years? There was another question also asking about there's seen a lot of sort of crops browning off nearer to harvest last autumn. So have you seen that?
Well, I mean, we see fusarium every year, and I mean, fusarium can grow and develop in all types of different seasons. So it's not necessarily dependent on very wet seasons or very dry seasons. You know, you will see it every year. You know, it occurs in situations where there's inoculum in the soil from previous maize crops, but also, you know, damage to plants can allow spores to get into the stems and onto the cobs. I mean, there's definitely varietal differences in the resistance to fusarium, and we have seen some varieties in the marketplace now that are more susceptible, and you do see these crops dying off rather rapidly. Whether there's more of it around, if there is, it's because those type of varieties have found favour in the marketplace. Most of our breeding, we do screen for fusarium, you know, quite rigorously through the breeding program, and having a good healthy plant to the end of the year is very important to us. And you know, good cleanliness, and as I said already, in grain maize, it's essential really. Whether it's more, I'm not sure, but certainly it is out there, and it is something to consider when you're buying a variety. Unfortunately, there's no real independent data. I mean, on the NIAB we do score for it, but it's not actually listed in the booklet. So one way you can have a look, if you're a bit worried about whether it's quite susceptible to fusarium, is you could have a look at the Stay Green score in here. How green it stays at harvest. If it's got a very low score compared to other varieties of similar maturity, you would probably assume that it dies rapidly, and usually rapid death is synonymous with disease. So that's a small thing that you could look at if you were thinking about variety choice.
Okay, Richard, we're down to our last couple of minutes now, so we'll hopefully get the poll result through in a minute and just put that up as well. Really quick one, if you can. It's just about a drought question, Colin R. If keep it really brief because we're down to the last minute. Maize in the past seems to have grown well in drought years, but in the last 2 years we've seen drought stressing crops and lower yields. Any thoughts on that? Yeah,
well, I mean, obviously all maize can suffer from drought, and obviously on the continent where they have the option to irrigate maize. I think the best thing to do there is to ensure that you get the crop off to the best possible start. Make sure that your soil preparation is right. You get rid of the compaction. You give the roots the best chance they can to get down and form a really good root zone, so that in the summer, if it does come hot, then the plants have got the more robust, and they can deal with that drought time as better, really. If you live if you have specifically drought problems every year on some very light land in, say, the east of England, you might look at dropping your seed rate down, down to 95,000, just to give those plants a little bit more room, a little bit more moisture for each plant. So that would be one way to combat it. But I think get your prep right, get the seed bed right at the beginning, and that'll help to get that root system down and properly established. Okay, Richard, thank you for that. Yeah. Probably we begin in a couple of extra minutes, so we'll keep going with the questions. Poll result has come in. You obviously did a fantastic job, because 47% of people said in terms of what are the most criteria making maize purchasing decisions, and 47% it's got to demonstrate a good return on investment. So it looks like we've got a very forward-thinking bunch with us today. So but the other 40%, we have to do it. We have to do that, I think. That's 40%, Richard, is that it will be ready for harvest early, which is obviously a very important criteria, isn't it, basically?
only 4%, and it would be like because it needs to be low priced. So that's interesting as well. So okay, and 8% with an impressive crop, which is always a bit of a vanity thing, isn't it? Really. So
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what we do for the last couple of minutes. I think we're nearly there. Some questions out there, particularly about varieties. Somebody, Louise has just mentioned about Gemma. I think it's the latest variety. The characteristics of that very briefly.
Gemma, very, very early, very high starch content, early maturing, high starch, good crop, good yield. Will fit those early areas. Early maturing areas. It can get the crop off early. You've got a good chance to get follow-on crops in. It's a good. It's our best new very early variety, really. So something want to look out for if you're on those marginal areas.
Okay, so I think that sort of ties in with that looking for that early variety, doesn't it? The poll result of 40% looking for an earlier variety fits into quite nicely to that one. Yeah. Okay. Time wise, I think we are about up. I'm just running out of questions slightly. We've got questions about why should I change from an old variety to a new one. I think we covered that quite nicely. So yeah, I think any other points, Richard, do you want to make?
Well, there is somebody who was talking there. There's a question I see that's to do with the NIAB list. How can the NIAB list help me with my variety selection? Well, there's a lot of independent. The NIAB list is a very important source of independent information. I mean, we produce it in our selection guide. I know it's very Limagrained up, but all the data in here is independent data from the NIAB BSPB trials. It's a vast source of information about all the varieties that are, a lot of the varieties that are currently available. You can make some of the comparisons I made in my presentation by taking that information from here. Obviously, not most of the breeders are in here. I think there's only one of the major breeders that doesn't really contribute to this. So there's plenty of information from across all the spectrum of varieties available. And I think, if you want to make informed choices, then talk to your seedsman, but also use this independent data to find out for yourself what these varieties can and can't do.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much. I think we've used our full time allocation up, so I'd just like to thank you for answering those questions so fully and across such a range of subjects and a variety of different topics.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for joining us this morning, and we appreciate you spending your time with us and for the questions that you posed with us. Just a reminder that the webinar will be available. The recording of it will be available on the Farmers Weekly website. And don't forget that we've got those resources, as Richard mentioned, available on the bottom, I think, of the page, and also available afterwards. So all it leaves me to do is to thank you again for being with us. Thank you again for the questions that you posed. Any of the questions that haven't been answered, we will get back to you individually afterwards. And so from Richard and I, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.